He looked like something the wind had dragged out of legend. Wild, unkempt hair trailing past his shoulders, clothes stitched together from worn leather and faded scraps. Silas Ward had vanished into the mountains 3 years ago, leaving behind the world and all its ghosts. He'd come here seeking silence, solitude, and forgetfulness. But on one violent, storm-lashed night, all of that would come undone. Outside, wind screamed through the towering pines, battering the hand-built shutters that lined Silas's cabin. Inside, he sat beside a crackling fire, carefully stitching a tear in an old boot. He hadn't heard another human voice in years. The forest was his only companion, a world where time moved slower and memories stayed buried. That's why the knock on his door hit like a lightning strike. He froze, needle halfway through the leather. Nobody should have been able to reach his cabin. The path here was little more than a whisper through the forest, tangled with roots, slick rocks, and steep climbs that turned most men back. This place had been built to be forgotten, just as he wanted. Then came the second knock. Louder.
Urgent.
Fists now, several of them, slamming against the thick door. Voices, frantic and foreign, rose above the howling wind. Fast, liquid syllables he didn't recognize. Yet fear clung to every word. Children were crying. Moving stiffly, Silas stood. His muscles had grown used to quiet, repetitive movements. His rifle was close, always ready. He edged toward the door, resting one ear against the rough wood. That's when he heard it. A woman's voice, pleading. He didn't understand her language, but her tone pierced through every barrier. She was begging, desperately, not for money, not for shelter, for mercy. His hand hovered over the thick wooden bar locking the door. Years that door had kept the world out, a world that had taken everything from him. But something in the woman's voice, something in the sobs of the children, cracked open something buried deep inside him. He drew the bar back, slowly, carefully. What waited outside would change everything. The door creaked open, revealing 6 soaked and desperate figures. Rain streamed down their faces, mingling with dirt and tears. Their clothes were tattered, barely clinging to their shivering bodies. A woman stood at the front, clutching a limp child to her chest. Behind her, 5 others, men and women alike. All looked like they'd been fleeing for days. She stepped forward, speaking rapidly in Chinese, pointing to the child, then to the others behind her. Her hands came together in a universal gesture. Prayer. Silas didn't need to know her words to understand. They were dying. They needed him. His eyes darted past them into the trees, scanning for danger. No one climbed this high without a reason. They were running from something terrible. His instincts screamed to be cautious, to send them away. But then he looked at the child. Her lips were blue, her eyes closed. Exposure like this would kill her in an hour. "Come in," Silas said. His voice was rough with disuse, a sound he barely recognized. They surged past him into the warmth like a flood breaching a dam. The woman collapsed near the fire, unwrapping the child. A tiny girl, barely breathing. The rest huddled close together, their eyes wide with fear and hope as they took in the sparse cabin. An older man stepped forward, his movements slow, respectful. He bowed low and, in broken English, said, "Thank you for mercy." Silas gave a small nod, already moving toward his shelves. He pulled down wool blankets, dried meat, even a precious tin of coffee. As he handed out supplies, the silence of his cabin, once comforting, filled with whispers, sobs, and the rustle of life. The little girl began to cry softly. That small, fragile sound hit Silas like a blow to the chest. As he stirred food over the fire, one chilling thought echoed in his mind. They didn't just stumble here. Someone sent them. Someone who knew exactly where he was. The older man introduced himself as Jin Shao. His English was slow and stilted, words pieced together like stones across a river. Through broken conversation and gestures, Silas began to understand. They were survivors, refugees from a Chinese community that had been burned to the ground by men who wanted the land. "Bad men come with fire," Jean said. his hands trembling around a tin cup. Say we don't belong. Say leave or die. The woman with the child was Jin's daughter. Her husband had stayed behind to help others escape. No one had seen him since. The child Ling was Jin's granddaughter. The others were neighbors, escaping with nothing but their lives. As Silas listened, a sharp unease tightened in his chest. These weren't lost travelers. They'd been directed here. But who would tell them how to find a cabin hidden so deep in the mountains that even maps didn't mark it? He placed his cup down slowly. Who told you about this place? He asked, eyes locked on Jean. The older man hesitated, then glanced at the others. They exchanged tense words in Chinese. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. Old man in town. He say mountain man here. Say you help people. Say follow creek. To big rocks. Then up where trees grow thick. He say, you understand running away. Silas felt the blood drain from his face. Only one man knew those directions. Only one had known why he'd come to these mountains. The man who had kept his secret. Doc, Silas whispered. The doctor from Millfield. The only person who knew the truth about what happened to his family. Before he could ask more, a sound pierced the storm, low and distant, but unmistakable. Dogs barking, getting closer. And just like that, the mountain was no longer safe. The sound of barking cut through the storm like a blade. Not wild howls, but the disciplined baying of trained hounds. Tracking dogs, closing in fast on the scent that led straight to Silas Ward's door. Chen clutched her daughter tighter, terror in her wide eyes. The others began shouting in Chinese, voices rising with panic. Jin stood slowly, the grim set of his jaw confirming what Silas feared. They find us, he said, his voice tight. Bad men with guns. They follow. Silas crossed the room and peered through a slit in the shutters. Down the mountainside he saw them, flickering torchlight weaving between the trees. At least 6 riders, maybe more hidden beyond the ridge, following the dogs with slow, deliberate precision. They were coming and they were close. His thoughts raced. These people, these strangers, had brought danger straight to his doorstep. He could send them back out into the storm, preserve his anonymity, protect the quiet life he'd built. But those children wouldn't last another hour in this cold. And the men behind the torches wouldn't show mercy. But standing his ground meant revealing himself, showing his face to the kind of men who might remember who he once was. As the dogs grew louder, Silas understood something chilling. Doc Patterson hadn't just sent these people to him for safety. The old doctor had forced his hand. He'd given Silas a choice, the same one Silas had failed to make 3 years ago. This time he could do the right thing. He turned from the window and faced the frightened group huddled by his fire. Faces streaked with exhaustion, eyes flickering with fear. The wind moaned outside, carrying the cries of the dogs ever closer. Listen carefully, Silas said, his voice calm and clear despite the storm raging inside him. There's a root cellar behind the cabin. It's hidden under a stack of firewood. All 6 of you can fit if you squeeze tight. Go now. Jin quickly translated. Chen's grip on her daughter tightened, her gaze darting to the front door like she could already see death standing on the other side. What about you? Jin asked. Silas was already checking the rifle. Then the old Colt revolver. Weapons he hadn't touched in years. Now familiar in his hands like old friends. I'm going to buy you time. I'll lie. Say I haven't seen anyone. Maybe they'll believe me. Jin shook his head. Dogs know. They follow scent. They know we hear. Maybe, Silas said. But I've got something they don't expect. He pried up a loose floorboard and pulled out a small metal tin. Inside were folded papers and a polished badge he hadn't worn in 3 years. He pinned it to his shirt with hands that trembled. I'm not just a mountain hermit, he said. I used to be Deputy Marshal Silas Ward. The name hit Jin like a strike to the chest. Even in distant settlements, people had heard of the lawman who cleaned up 3 towns and took down the infamous Brennan gang. A man who disappeared after tragedy struck. Why you leave? Jin asked softly. Silas's jaw tightened. Because I failed. I saw the danger too late. My wife and daughter paid the price. He adjusted the badge on his chest. But I won't make that mistake again. Torchlight danced closer now, 200 yards, maybe less. The men were moving carefully, but they were coming. Silas figured he had 10 minutes, if that. Go, he said. Get into that cellar. Stay silent. No matter what you hear. Jin bowed deeply. If we live, we not forget. If you live, get to Fort Collins. Tell them Deputy Marshal Ward sent you. They'll get you west, somewhere safe. The 6 refugees slipped out the back, silent as shadows. Silas watched until they vanished, swallowed by the storm and darkness. Then he turned toward the front of the cabin, toward what was coming. 3 years ago he had buried the man he used to be, but tonight that man would rise again. The first rider appeared at the tree line like something out of a nightmare. A towering figure with a torch in one hand and a pistol on his hip. 9 others followed, spread out in a pattern that spoke of experience. These men weren't looking for lost travelers. They were hunting. Their leader was tall, scarred, and cold-eyed. He scanned the cabin like he already owned it. Silas stepped onto the porch, rifle loose but ready. The light from his doorway gleamed off the badge on his chest. A glint of steel and justice. That's far enough, he called, voice steady, sharp. State your business. The scarred man nudged his horse forward a step, resting his hand near his holster. Name's Clayton Reeves. We're tracking some Chinese criminals, said to have stolen property. Our dogs led us right to you. Your dogs are wrong, Silas replied flatly. I've been alone up here for years. Ask around Millfield. Reeves offered a smile, cold and false. That's so? Then you won't mind if we have a look around. Just to be sure. I mind plenty, Silas said. This is private land. You're trespassing. One of the riders, younger and jumpy, leaned forward. We got rights to pursue fugitives. They burned a white settlement. Killed folks. Silas scanned their faces. These weren't lawmen. They were raiders cloaked in false authority. Thugs looking for blood and loot under the guise of justice. You got papers? He asked. Any legal documentation proving you're deputized? Reeves's smile twisted into something uglier. Don't need papers to put down thieves and murderers. Now step aside before we make you. Funny thing, Silas said, shifting his rifle. I do have papers. Been carrying this badge for over a decade. My authority outranks whatever fantasy you're playing at. The words hit like a rock. Uncertainty flickered across several of the riders' faces. They hadn't expected resistance. Not from a federal marshal. But Reeves wasn't backing down. His scarred face tightened. Marshal or not, you're harboring criminals. That makes you one of them. To what crime? Silas shot back. The only crime I see is 10 armed men threatening a federal officer on his land. The tension stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Silas could feel it. The weight of 6 lives hidden behind his cabin. The heat of the rifle in his hands. The silence that always comes right before violence. Tell you what, he said, stepping forward. Turn around now. Walk back down that trail, and I'll forget this happened. Stay, and I'll arrest the lot of you. Reeves's hand twitched toward his gun. Silas felt everything slow. The next second would decide it all, life or death, justice or tragedy. The wind hissed. The torchlight flickered. Then Reeves froze. His eyes narrowed, and a flicker of recognition passed through them. Ward? He whispered. Silas Ward? Thought you were dead. Silas raised the rifle, steady and sure. Disappointed. The other riders shifted uncomfortably. Even men like these had heard the stories. The lawman who took on 6 outlaws alone, who stood against the Brennan gang in a firefight that became legend. And now, here he was again. A ghost risen from the mountains, ready to fight for what was right, no matter the cost. Silas didn't move. He stood firm on the porch, his rifle steady, the weight of the badge on his chest catching the light like a silent challenge. The air between him and the riders was thick with the kind of silence that always comes before violence. Then Reeves spoke, his tone laced with contempt. So what now, Marshal? You plan on gunning us all down? If that's what it takes to protect the people hiding behind this cabin, Silas replied, voice calm but sharp as steel. But I'd prefer you turn those horses around and forget you were ever here. The threat was clear, but Reeves didn't back down, not yet. He shifted in the saddle, fingers twitching near his pistol. But the confidence in his eyes had started to crack. You think that badge still means something? He growled. Silas took a step forward, his rifle raised just enough to remind them who they were dealing with. It means enough to bury every last one of you if I have to. Now ask yourself, how many of you are ready to die on this mountain tonight? One of the younger riders faltered, his voice breaking the standoff. Boss, if that's really Silas Ward, maybe we shouldn't push this. Another man nodded, then a third. The fear was spreading. Even among outlaws, the name Silas Ward still meant something. Stories don't die easily, especially the ones soaked in blood and justice. Reeves gritted his teeth, his men's loyalty dissolving like snow under sunlight. His pride wanted a fight, but his gut knew better. This isn't the end, he said coldly.
No, Silas answered.
But it's the end of tonight. Reeves jerked his reins, and his horse turned sharply. The others followed, some quickly, others hesitating. One by one, they rode back into the darkness, torches flickering like angry ghosts disappearing into the trees. Silas stood alone as the quiet returned, broken only by the wind and the distant creak of the hidden cellar door. Jin and the others emerged slowly, cautious, uncertain if they were safe. You saved us, Jin said softly. Silas shook his head. Not just you. I saved what little of myself I thought I'd lost. He glanced down at the badge pinned to his chest, the symbol of a life he'd buried years ago, a life of duty,